The Asian American community is so vibrant in New York, and so I immediately, when I moved there, I started to get involved and started to volunteer at the New York Asian Women's Shelter and at an organization called the Committee Against Anti-Asian Violence. And I was working on this hotline that in the middle of the night would take calls from Asian immigrant women who were leaving relationships that were abusive and needing counseling, needing support, needing resources, and so much of their concerns and their calls were economic concerns. They were about where they could find an affordable apartment and where are the jobs that pay enough to be able to take care of your children on one income. And that question was a question that really plagued me, because all of the jobs that people held, there weren't that many different options. It was people were either working in garment factories, working in restaurants, working in nail salons, or working in care as caregivers or domestic workers. And really that, and none of those jobs earned a living wage. None of them have job security. None of them have access to health care or benefits. And so you have a situation where these women are literally working so hard, doing everything right, and still not able to pay the bills or take care of the people they love. How could that be? That to me felt like a key part of a much bigger set of problems that we needed to address, and if we could figure it out. And so I became obsessed with the question of how you would solve that problem. There was a group of us who decided to start a project to support women who are working in low-wage jobs. The Women Workers Project was what it was called. And we just started doing outreach to nail salons, to restaurants, to domestic workers. What was so interesting was that it was always the domestic workers who would come to the events, and many of them had worked in Hong Kong before coming to the US to work. And so many of them, because in Hong Kong, domestic workers have a union, and they have a standard contract that is also tied to their immigration status, where they have a set number of vacation days, they have Sundays off, they have some sick time. And here in the US, it was like the Wild West. They were shocked that in the land of the free and the home of the brave, they had less rights than in Hong Kong. And so that was just an immediate topic of conversation, like, why don't we have a standard contract here? Why don't we have rights? And we were all just like, right, why? And then I realized, well, we would have to pass a law. The Filipino workers said, you know what, in order to do this, we're gonna have to talk to the Caribbean women, we're gonna have to talk to the Latinas who do this work, we're gonna have to talk to everybody. So we decided to host a convention called the Having Your Say Convention, where we did outreach for months. We had these flyers, we invited people to come, and it was a day where we sat around small round tables. About 250 domestic workers came that day, and we had simultaneous interpretation in 7 different languages, so everyone could communicate in the language they felt most comfortable in. And people shared their stories around the table, and they identified what were the big problems that they felt like they needed addressed in order to feel like their work was respected and recognized and protected. And so we spent a whole day together, really hearing from workers and sharing stories, and came up with all of these lists on butcher paper of priorities and problems on the job. Literally, the walls were covered with ideas for how to make these jobs better. And what we did was we teamed up with a group of law students from the NYU Immigrant Rights Law Clinic. We asked the law students to turn it into legislation, and then we basically took what they turned out from our ideas that the workers came up with, a draft bill. We rented a 15-passenger van, drove to Albany, and tried to find a sponsor for our Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. And it took almost 7 years, but New York in 2010 became the first state in the country to pass a Domestic Worker Bill of Rights.